So today I'm going to try to go over the process of adding another weapon. This is going to be this sort of a area of effect damaging weapon. What's going to happen is the ship's going to shoot a missile. That missile is going to explode into this particle effect, and whatever ships or objects caught in the radius of this effect are going to be damaged. So what you're looking at right now is called Particle Universe. This is an add-on to Ogre that an Ogre user created and started selling. I bought this. It was about 20 bucks. It was a really great investment because it allows me to visually edit particles. So here's a particle script, and I can say I want 200 particles, individual particles, and then right away it shows me what that looks like. I can change the color and things like that. For now I'm just going to leave it, this kind of unrealistic blue, but we're just going to leave it. So using Particle Universe, I set up my script for the visual side, and then the coding side is going to determine the damage and the other effects. This is a mock-up what the final result is going to resemble. We're going to shoot a missile. That missile triggers this swarm cloud. This is just a mock-up for the visual, but essentially whatever's trapped in this area is going to become damaged. Just shoot another one there. So right now this has no effect, it's just a visual, but we're going to do the code to have the game engine recognize whatever object trapped in this cloud to become damaged. So we're in our source code. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this energy missile piece of code and paste it, and I'm going to rename it area of effect missile. Copy these items. I'm going to leave all these things as they are. This is our first step. Going to go to my other portion of my source code, and I'm going to copy this as well. Just did some copy paste here, and I'm going to call this, just going to rename certain things to make this unique. So yeah, there we go. So we have this basic source code of our missile. So the way this works coding wise is this is a class. So this is a container of objects and methods that do certain things. This class I just called area of effect missile. It is derived from this other class called missile. So what happens is this area of effect missile class takes everything from this missile class. This saves me a lot of time programming because I create one parent class, and then it lets me create child classes very quickly, saving a bunch of time. Plus it's neater. There's less code, so there's less area of bugs. So right now I have this very similar missile to my energy missile that creates this particle system when it's fired. What I need to do now is to add in the code to detect the damage in the radius of that swarm cloud. So to get the idea behind this area of effect damage cloud, we need to talk about physics. So here's my ship. This is the visual representation of my ship. It doesn't have to match the physical representation of the ship to the physics engine. I'm going to show you guys what the physics engine sees, and you can see by this sort of a white outline, this is my debug of the physics engine. Anything caught within these white lines registers as a hit. As you can see, it doesn't really match what the ship looks like, and that is because it is optimized to save on triangles, to save on performance. So certain objects in the game are physical objects like this ship, but there's also objects in the game that are sort of virtual collision objects. If you look at this gate, it's active, and if I were to pass through it, I would go on to the next sector. How that works is there's an invisible physics collision object here. I'm going to toggle physics debug so you can see it. This square right here, this is what triggers my ship going into that other realm. That's one way of doing things. You could also do distance checks other ways, but this is one way of doing it. When a ship hits this box, going in this direction, it gets transported into the next map. So that's what we're going to do for that swarm missile. We're going to create that virtual collision box, and any ship that enters that virtual collision box is going to be damaged. So here's the source code portion of that collision. There is this class, this collision object class, that is a child of this physics object class, and this lets me create a particular size. Here it is, here's the size that creates that virtual object. So I'm going to create another one, and I'm just going to copy another, call it damage collision object, damage collision object. This is good. We have a parent. The parent is going to be the missile in this case. We have a size. Here's what happens when there's a collision with another object, and what we're going to do in this case, we're going to cause damage to that other object. Let's jump into our other portion of the source code. Copy this. There we go. Damage. Damage collision object. Okay, so here, this is actually, I just copied the repair collision object. So the swarm is going to be the opposite, right? It's going to subtract health instead of add to health. Actually, I could just use the repair object and just add negative health. So we have basically everything we need. Now we need to tell the missile to have this damage collision object. So we're going to go back to the missile code, and we're going to make the missile code aware of this damage collision object piece of code we just wrote. There we go, it's actually aware of it now, and I'm going to create a reference to a new one. Whoops. So here I'm saying that this missile, area of effect missile, contains this damage collision object. There we go. And we're going to go back to our missile code here. We're going to create a reference to the damage collision object. We have to tell it to grab the source file of this collision object so it knows what's going on. There we go. So we're back at our damage collision object here, and I'm going to change this to damage. I'm going to say I want you to lose 100 health per second, which is quite a lot of health per second. And health minus damage. There we go. Let's see if that compiles. Yep, that compiles, so we can move on to the next step. Now we're back at our missile code, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to say, hey, I want a new damage collision object. So I say damage collision object equals a new damage collision object, and I'm going to say, give it some parameters here. Position is going to be get position. So the position of this object is going to be the parent's position. The size is going to be, this is a vector 3, so it's in 3-dimensional. So we're going to say 100 by 100 by 100. And the parent is going to be this object. So now, when this missile hits, this damage collision object gets created, as well as this particle effect. So actually, I need to grab this, and I need to put this in the missile fire. Yeah, because this portion is when the missile is created. but that's not necessarily when the missile fires. This is when the actual missile fires. So we're going to put this code here. We're going to do an error check here. So what this means is if this object doesn't exist, then create it. And that's good. So we have a damaged collision object on fire. Here's our physics engine source code, and this is what determines what's going to happen when a physical body collides with a collision object. So in case of a gate, we tell it, I guess we just say, hey, physical object, physical object. Okay, so this is all the same here. For some reason, I sectioned these out. Maybe maybe at the time I intended to do something special with. So when our damaged collision object collides with a physical object, it does this collision with physical object. Let's look at that here. Collision with physical object is going to do the damage to whatever's in there. So we're basically ready. We're ready for our test. And we are back in the game. I'm going to launch my missile and I'm going to see if it creates this collision object. Did that portion, the visual portion. I'm going to toggle debug. And there it is. It's not what I expected. So there is something not working. So we're going to go back to the source code. I'm looking at the source code for this object and I see that it takes the parent position and it multiplies it by this position I give it. So actually what I need to do is when I go back to my missile, I told it to get the parent's position, so it's taking the parent's position twice. So I'm going to change this just to 0. So it's just going to take the parent's position one time. And I'm going to run my code again. I'm going to see if that's what did it. So we're ready for another test of the swarm missile. I'm just going to toggle the debug for physics, launch my missile. There we go. So we see this rectangle in space. I'm going to fly into it and I should begin taking damage. There we go. And I'm going to die. There we are. So we have a successful test of the swarm missile. So we're back at our code, and now is the fun part. When this missile explodes, when it expires, we want to clean up our code, otherwise we would crash. So here is our die of this area of effect missile. Here's what happens when the missile dies. I'm going to take this. So the particle system that swarmed that cloud, if it exists, this is what it means. If this particle system exists, then stop it. So I'm going to say if this damaged collision object exists, delete it. Delete this object and set it to null so that the next time around when we fire this missile here, it creates it in a new position ready to go. I'm also going to take this, and this is what gets called when the missile gets created when I load the game. So of course I want to do that as well. I'm going to paste that in here to create this object. And that's pretty good. So there's a few things left over. For example, here we hard-coded this missile size, this swarm radius size. We're going to make this moddable. I'm going to do that off screen, but just to give an example of things that are kind of left over. And that's about it. Well, actually, okay, what we can demonstrate is how, what would happen if we wanted this swarm to move. So I'm going to jump back into my XML here. And to get this swarm not moving, I set the cruise speed to 0, but I'm going to set the cruise speed to 30. Time till cruise 1. So now that I set this, this missile is going to be able to move. I'm going to make it very maneuverable. There we go. And I'm going to launch my game here. So I've set up some enemies, 4 guys versus 1 of me here. And I'm going to hit play. We're going to test our new missile. Going to target the nearest and fire the missile. There we go. Is it moving? Yes, it is moving. And now it's damaging my friend there. Shoot another one. There we go. And there we go. So we have a successful test of our swarm missile. I have some anomalies there that I have to fix, but there we go. So I hope this gives you guys, or those of you that aren't too familiar with how coding works, I hope I gave you guys a general idea of what it takes, or what coding a video game involves, or really anything. So behind the scenes, what you're doing as a coder, you're manipulating data. You're telling the computer, first you're creating the data, and then you're manipulating it. So here, I'm manipulating my object's health, whatever object is trapped in that swarm. I'm saying take the health and subtract damage from the health. And somewhere else in the code, this object's health is checked, and if it drops below 0, that object explodes. So this is really what coding is about. Okay, so you have a database, you create a database, and you manipulate that data, and your rendering engine takes the data of your objects, what they look like, what triangles make them up, and the rendering engine displays that on the screen. And then you, as the coder, you create the logic behind the game. So this actually took very small amount of time. This took like maybe 30 minutes, and a lot of it was spent me talking. So once you get all these tools together in your source code, you can quickly reuse them, and you can create all sorts of new objects. So I hope this demonstrates the power of this engine that I've built here. You know, it took 4 years, but I think it's worth it because now it's pretty well designed where I can add weapons pretty quickly. And I hope one day you guys will shoot this missile. I'm not really sure exactly how this missile is going to work, who's going to have this missile, but I hope that we'll come up with a cool, interesting way to add it into the game. And maybe I'll reuse this code. I'll reuse this code maybe for some kind of a nebula that damages you, or some kind of a radiation field. You know, you never want to just have one thing. You want to reuse it everywhere you can as an indie, because hey, you're just one guy. Reuse it as much as you can. Thanks for watching.